All right, I'm here, and I just realized I didn't change my backdrop. My backdrop's all still like from this morning when I was teaching Station 11, so it's all still the end of the world as we know it. Oh well, it's been one of those days. So leave the background the way that it is, and that's okay because a lot of apocalyptic stuff is post-apocalyptic stuff is dystopic, and we're looking at a work that is certainly dystopic today. The film version of Harrison Bergeron. The movie was made by, it was directed by a guy named Chandler Tuttle. Hey, Reed. And it's based on the short story by Kurt Vonnegut. It was one of the first films I'd seen where they adapted a short story and it was made available in DVD. And I think this guy's made, if they made any money off this film, it's because they adapted a work that a lot of English teachers and profs were using for their classes. Hello, Jordana. Hi, Courtney. Hey, Desi. So yeah, we're talking about the film today. We're still talking about, hey, Julie, Bree, still talking about Harrison Bergeron because we have to have that comparative conversation, but focusing a bit more perhaps on the film. So I'll just wait a little longer for everybody to file in. And this is it today. This is the last lecture that I would say you have to attend for the content for the course. I have given some consideration to doing one last less structured, rigorous, whatever you want to say, get together, because I know that a number of my students have been letting me know that they've appreciated the video times as a way of structuring the complete chaos of life these days, or just the lack of structure that we have when we're at home. Hey, Sandra. So if you want, I'm going to be here next week on Wednesday at 2, and it'll be sort of a free-for-all. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite short story anthologies, give you some recommendations for short stories that you might find, or short stories anthologies you might find fun, because we've done some work with some rigorous anthologies this semester, and I would like to indicate some of the ones that are, I guess, just a good time. Not that those stuff that we've been reading has been so terrible. No, because we love Deborah Willis, and we had I think a good time taking a look at Richard Van Camp's short stories earlier in the semester as well. But I talk about some great short story anthologies that I know of next Tuesday, but that's not really class content. In a what do I need to know for the final? You guys already know what's on the final if you've been attending class. If you haven't, I'm going to send around an email and you'll know. So don't worry about it. You're not going to go into that good night without a lot of great information. And by that good night, I mean finals, period of finals, right? So let's talk about 2081. I took a look over your responses on the discussion board, and Reed had said that he didn't really think there was a huge difference between the versions, that there was a bleakness in both. And I think that there's certainly a way in which the world that we imagine in Harrison Bergeron will square to some degree with the film version that we see in 2081. And if you're tuning into this and you're like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, check out Harrison Bergeron. It's online. You can find Kurt Vonnegut's short story online. And 2081 is also available, although I believe it has Spanish subtitles. So I'm guessing it's probably not copyright okay in North America, but there you go. So it's just, there is this way in which these these works seem to be the same thing. And I liken it in many ways to how people have said that they felt that the Peter Jackson movies were very close adaptations of Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, okay, yeah, beat for beat, there's a lot of the action from the books are in there. Same thing happens with Harrison Bergeron. A lot of the things that happen in the short story are present in the film. And then there's a few things that the film throws in for extras. I remember one of my students, first time I ever taught 2081, one of my students just being irate. They ruined it. They ruined Harrison Bergeron by including the bomb. And I was like, really? You thought it ruined it? I have some thoughts about the bomb, but I'm going to come back around to the bomb later. In the meantime, I want to just riff off of Reed saying that both of them felt bleak. I think the worlds they are in are certainly bleak. I don't think Vonnegut's tone is bleak. I think the action he presents is bleak, but I don't know that I would say that his tone is bleak. So there's a dissonance there, an ironic dissonance, we might say, because irony is often about the distance between what's happening and the way in which we're talking about it. And Vonnegut's talking about things that, if they were really happening, would be awful. Bleak. And Sandra talked about this a bit in saying how she thought, how she perceived Harrison Bergeron in terms of its action, in terms of what was going on, and that Chandler Tuttle's film felt like a how did you put it? A fulfilling of the expectations that you had in reading the short story. That it felt like Harrison was being this revolutionary. And that's how I felt the first time I ever read Harrison Bergeron too. I was like, yeah, get him, man, stick it to the man. You stand up for the little guy. And he's, you know, in my mind, he was a revolutionary hero because I let the story read me. And I have strong sort of, to put it in D&D terms, I have strong paladin tendencies. To put it in other terms, if something goes wrong, I think I ought to help. And so when I see Harrison Bergeron come in, I imagine him through that lens. But then I take a closer read of the story and I'm like, I'm not really sure that that's necessarily what's going on here. And this was something that a few of you identified. Desi identified that Harrison in the short story comes off as absurdly pompous, right? I am the emperor. And where's my empress? And shaking the musicians and wanting his way. And there's an academic source that talks about this by Daryl Hattenhauer. It's called The Politics of Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison Bergeron. And he says, those who hold Harrison up as a model of freedom overlook the fact that he is a would-be dictator. He tells the musicians, right, I'll make you barons and dukes and earls. Thus, Bergeron endorses monarchy. If there is a reversion to medieval monarchy, there will be serfs, the functional equivalent of slaves. And so we might look at the world of Harrison Bergeron and say, well, this is monstrous. But Harrison comes along and he's not really giving us much of an alternative. So, Desi, you had said you were worried that you had been read by the story. I don't think you were. I think you've got a pretty spot-on analysis of the original short story, especially. So, you know, but you focused on how the film removed all of what might be understood as comedic or absurd elements in Harrison Bergeron, which are, as you noted, or you said, I believe these are hallmarks of Vonnegut. I've not read a ton of Vonnegut, so I couldn't say, but what I have read from secondary sources talking about Vonnegut is that there is a sort of ironic voice to a lot of what he writes, and it's certainly present here. And so we lose these absurd elements, these ridiculous elements in the film version. I have often said that I feel like 2081 is Harrison Bergeron filtered through Ridley Scott's Blade Runner or The Matrix or some other dystopic film. And Julie put it this way. She said, you know, she felt that 2081 was far more realistic and in an Orwellian way, which I thought was a really great way to say that, in an Orwellian way. Like, this feels dystopic in that way that we understand dystopia from high school novel studies like 1984 or Brave New World. And The film version of Harrison Bergeron, 2081, feels that way. I agree. It feels like they took this absurd concept of these weights and the masks and all of the stuff that they do to Harrison, and the production design team rendered it believable at some level. It gave it a sense of verisimilitude that I don't think Vonnegut ever really goes for. Even I don't think there's any intention with the bags of birdshot and whatnot. Why wouldn't you just take them off? Who's gonna come? Like, yeah, there's a padlock around your neck, but surely, there'd be a way to get that off. Why don't you just take that off? But in the film, we can see that there's all these readouts and registers on there, and so we might come to the conclusion that Big Brother is watching you with those readouts. They can tell when you take that off or whatever it might be. And I also liked your observation that you felt that it would be if Harrison Bergeron was going to be directed with fidelity to Vonnegut's version, with the Halloween and hardware and the clown nose and all that stuff with Harrison's outfit, that it should be directed by Tim Burton. And I agree with you. I'm like, Burton would be, and the music's by Danny Elfman. That's the right director for the absurdity of Vonnegut. Chandler Tuttle has taken the story elements of Harrison Bergeron and then crafted a very distinct narrative. Same stuff happens, although as some of you noted, the lines get switched around. Like there's that trade out at the very end where George is the one who sees Harrison die and Hazel's the one who comes in from the other room. The insertion even, and I can't remember who noted this, but you said, I'm not really sure this is a big deal, or you didn't make a big deal out of it. But in 2081, there are a lot of camera shots that focus on Hazel washing the dishes. And when I teach film studies, I say, don't get all bent out of shape when there's something that the camera keeps focusing on and you're like, I don't understand what's going on here. You don't go, what's with it? And I don't think you were doing this, by the way, on the discussion board, but I have been around people who go like, what's with all the dishwashing scenes? Why do they keep focusing on the dishwashing? Now, really genuinely ask that question. Why do they keep focusing on the dishwashing? Why do they keep focusing on Hazel being outside the room while George is watching the television? What's going on there? Why do they keep making that focus? I'm going to come to that. There's an answer to it. Some of you noted that music plays a huge role in the film, but arguably music plays a relatively large role in the short story, because there's people dancing to music on TV at the beginning, just like in the film. And then Harrison gets the musicians to play something so that he and his Empress can dance to it. It's not that music plays a larger role necessarily in 2081, but that you can hear it. That's the thing. That's the difference. I think it goes back to when we were talking about Deborah Willis's I Am Optimus Prime. And I think if you made a short film of I Am Optimus Prime, you would fill it with all those songs, with the references to these pop songs and types of pop songs that the boy's father listens to. There's an immediacy to film. Like, I can go and I can look up music in a story. If they tell me exactly what the music is, I can go and I can look it up and I can listen to it. There's a novel called The Cellist of Sarajevo. Find it on Spotify or whatever, and you can listen to that and you will know what the cellist in The Cellist of Sarajevo is playing every time he plays music, even though you can't hear it. Aren't playing together because they're terrible, right? Because they have to play that way. They're playing with handicaps or whatever it might be. That's one of the interesting things about 2081 as a film, is that they don't suck early in the film, but they do, although they don't suck at playing the same thing over and over again. If you go and rewatch the movie, they just play the same sequence of classical music on endless loop. And it's interesting to me that at the point that Harrison says music in 2081, we get this solo cellist who just knocks it out of the park. in this sudden moment of inspired improvisation on a cello. And, you know, if you stop to think about that for a second, the verisimilitude goes right out the window. But maybe he's been practicing in secret. Maybe all these people have been practicing these things in secret, because there's a sense in which it seems like everybody who's in the audience loves what's happening when Harrison gets the musicians to play music that isn't on endless loop, that isn't a bit banal, to do something new and interesting with this really compelling melody line to it. But we can hear it. That's the thing about film. People say, like, the book is always better than the movie. Book can't play music for you. So if you want your audience, whomever it might be, to experience that music with you, you'd have to write about it in a very different way. So in that sense, yes, the 2081 is music plays a huge role. It also plays a huge role because that entire sequence of Harrison dancing, of the handicapper general's guards coming in, and that's a distinct difference too, right? Like, we've got the handicapper general's men standing outside with riot guard face masks, and they've all got readouts. And if you were paying close attention to production design, and I asked you guys to look for this, tell me if you noticed anything about Diana Moon Glampers, the handicapper general, from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. There's this tiny little change, and I thought it's quite significant. But in comes all these guys with riot gear and guns, while Harrison and his empress, but he doesn't call her an empress in the film, so it's just him and the dancer, are dancing. And the music plays over top of that in this montage sequence, and it's very, very well edited. It's this wonderful series of edits and some really great camera moves when the camera pushes towards Harrison and the dancer. Like Armie Hammer, the guy who plays Harrison, not a dancer. She's the dancer, and the camera keeps focusing on her and making sure that we, you know, that she's the thing that's moving in the frame in a way that just makes it feel to some degree like Harrison is dancing. Yes, that's exactly it, Jordana. Diana Moon Glampers is wearing handicaps at the beginning, and wearing gray and white, whereas at the end she wore black and there were no handicaps. That's right. So she's bland and just as milquetoast as everybody else in the world. She is equal when she's on TV. That's the really important thing, is that well, what you said is important too, but it's also important to note that she's on the news when we see her with her handicaps. So she's giving the official face of the handicapper general's office. And then when we see her later, she has no handicaps. Her sidekick has no handicaps. What he has in his ear reports back to whomever is the control. And this is something that Vonnegut doesn't say one way or another. He doesn't say whether or not Diana Moon Glampers is packing handicaps. We don't know. And we don't know if there's anybody back at control, central control, who is also not wearing handicaps, who's, you know, because it's just Diana Moon Glampers comes in and shoots the two of them. That's an absurd moment too. And absurd isn't bad, by the way. If the author's intention is to create an absurd situation, then we want to make sure that that's part of our understanding of the unity of effect, the making of meaning towards the epiphany, that it might be absurd too. But like, what's Diana Moon Glampers doing right outside the TV studio? Is she down the block? Did she just walk down the block with a double barrel shotgun? These are not the questions that we ought to be asking. But it does highlight the sort of absurdity of that moment. 2081, it's not made absurd. It's like watching any number of films involving like a bank heist or terrorist takeover or something, and in comes the negotiator, or in comes the squad that's going to take them out. And that's the way that those shots are framed, with, you know, these guys up in the balcony with their guns trained on Harrison. All these weapons, but they're not going to be the ones to shoot Harrison. As the music plays, as the music swells, as the music affects our emotions. And this is all done in these, along with edits. The montage includes cutting away scenes that cut away. We call this intercutting or cross-cutting in film, to the bomb that the first one, which was a decoy, which the riot gear dudes deactivate. And then the camera pulls away and shows us another bomb. And that bomb is a broadcast bomb. That's the one that Harrison really wanted to use. He's never going to blow the place up. He was always just looking to broadcast. And this, too, is a very different Harrison. Harrison in the short story, petulant, monarchist to be. Harrison in 2081 is a radical. He's a revolutionary who wants to free the people, I guess, free their minds. And so they control the broadcast, but his broadcast bomb cuts through the signal where it's shut off. So there's this music and it's swelling, and his father begins to hear the music, and he's sitting in his living room, and he loves the music, and you see it on his face, and there's this moment of appreciation, and then Central Command or whoever it is shut off the broadcast. Harrison sets off his broadcast bomb, and the people at home get to see the dance. They get to hear the music. The music is beautiful. The dance is lovely. In comes Diana Moon Glamperson. This is all choreographed with the cross-cutting and raising our emotions until up she comes and she shoots them. Even the way in which she fires, like, we don't see the gun go off. We just see this bright light keeps the film from becoming this moment of explicit violence. And right before she goes to shoot them, her aide realizes, oh, she's on TV. This is being filmed. And he goes to and you see this shot through the camera of her live on TV. And in that moment, we as the viewer might go, yeah, Harrison did it. He got the message out. But then those signals that they shoot through the headsets make people like George forget that they've seen anything. Because in comes Hazel and she says, what's wrong? And he says, I don't know, something's sad on the TV. And she says, just forget sad things. I always do, right? But does she? Does Hazel always forget sad things in 2081? So this is why I think they needed to do the reversal. Julie Haggerty playing Hazel and just incidentally, by the way, this is one of the best moments of stereotyped casting that I can think of, in maybe the history of film. I don't know. That would be a bit much, but it's brilliant. Julie Haggerty played this really ditzy woman in the Airplane movies back in the 1980s. And she was typecast as that. It ruined her career. Ostensibly, it ruined her career. She never played anything else. And here she is playing this character who, as I've said, I think is based on Gracie Burns. And she just comes across as like not very smart. I love when she says, I'd make a good handicapper general. And he says, yeah, you would. Just the way that the guy playing George delivers that line. Nicely done, Desi. Just the way that he delivers that line tells us that he thinks Diana Moon Glampers is not very smart either. But yeah, as Desi notes, Hazel comes in at the end. She's been in the kitchen washing the dishes. She didn't see what happened. Arguably, she probably isn't smart enough to really take in what happened the way that the film portrays her and the short story writes her. But she comes in at the end, says, forget about sad things. I always do. George exits. That sounded like a doozy. You can say that again. That one sounded like a real doozy. And out he goes. And then she hums. She starts singing the tune of the song that the cellist improvised. And that took me a couple viewings to catch. I didn't catch that the first time I watched it, but I would watch this in class with students. And I remember when that hit me, that, you know, and I feel stupid that it didn't, because Chandler Tuttle goes out of his way to make sure that we get that connection, in that she's humming it, and then it goes to the credits, and the credits have that song. Hazel remembers. She remembers that art. She remembers that creativity. She remembers that exceptional moment, if only through the music. And it's like the film is hinting that you can't kill that kind of thing. So whatever Harrison Bergeron is about, and that's as I said last class, it's contentious, the contentious space of debate. A number of you noted, you're like, I'm not really sure what the epiphany is here. I'm having a tough time with this. And I think Vonnegut's ambiguous enough in Harrison Bergeron that it's difficult to know. But there are a few things that stand out in Tuttle's film that feel like he's trying to say something about the power of art, or the power of creativity, the power of I don't want to say exceptionalism, because I don't really think that's what he's doing. But I think he is saying, like, if you try to make everything equal, then you won't be able to have these moments of brilliance. But the world that 2081 takes place in is trying to keep everybody equal, keep everybody at this lowest common denominator, which also, by the way, is absurd, going back to Harrison Bergeron, because I think that's one of Vonnegut's points. It's just that it would never work. And he's just doing it through a satirical voice. But in 2081, it's given this verisimilitude to make it seem like it could, but Chandler Tuttle saying the human spirit would still break out, or something like that. You know, that art would find a way to get through, and that people want that. The faces of the audience, they're enraptured when the music is playing and the dancing is being done. So I think when my students saying, well, it's ridiculous, it's terrible about the inclusion of the bomb, is where a lot of people will rest on assessing an adaptation. Like, they took out my favorite part. Okay, but maybe they were going for a different unity of effect. Maybe they wanted to have a different epiphany than the original work. Maybe fidelity to that original wasn't the point. And I think in 2081, and this is Sandra again, right? Sandra said that the movie felt like there was this fulfillment of expectation that she had, that I had. When I read Harrison Bergeron, I wanted Harrison Bergeron to be a hero. I didn't want him to be this, I am the emperor. I wanted him to set everybody free, a little Moses action. It's not who he is in Vonnegut. And maybe Chandler Tuttle felt the same way. And he said, you know what? I'm going to make a movie version of that. But I'm going to change it. I'm going to make Harrison a hero, and a real hero. He's not going to be, I'm not going to complicate that. I don't think it's any mistake or any error that he comes in with that beam, that he's carrying on his shoulders like this. I mean, he's just straight up Christ figure inside those stalks, right? Like, he doesn't get crucified, but he gets killed, and it's this moment of, we might say, it's a sacrificial act, right? A little on the nose, but nevertheless, it's that fulfillment of that expectation that we might have as a reader coming to a text and going, oh, well, it's cool. I like the story. I really like the world, but I wish he'd been more heroic. And what I tell my students when they say, well, I think Harrison is heroic, I'm like, he's not. Or any other adaptation, they say, I think what's going on here is, I'm like, well, but take a look at the text. That's not what's happening here. And they go, well, that's just my opinion. I'm like, no, that's another story. You need to go join a creative writing class, and then you can write that story. And that's what I feel like Chandler Tuttle's done. That's why I said the other day, there's a lot of ideas that I have about why the text is our evidence, why it's important to read in that way, are born out of my study of Harrison Bergeron in connection with 2081. Because Chandler Tuttle is made, as I mentioned Tim Power saying, if we have two versions and they're both good, then we have two great stories. I think with Harrison Bergeron in 2081, we got the same thing. We got a great short story over here that's satirical and it's incisive and it's compelling, it's interesting, and it's just like a lot of our trickster writers, just like Octavia Butler. We have questions, and so the story haunts us a bit afterwards. But then we also get 2081. It's a bit more cut and dry. It's not as many questions necessarily afterwards, but it is a compelling bit of short film. But this is not the only instance. Just as a, moving from Harrison Bergeron in 2081 to other instances of short stories being made into films. It's not the only time that this has been done, or that short stories are expanded in some way, because there's certainly expansion going on here as well. But Angela Carter's The Company of Wolves was made into a film as a very odd short story, and it's a very strange and dreamlike film. Field of Dreams is based on a short story that was then expanded into a novel, made into a film. The movie The Arrival is an adaptation of a novella. And so short stories lend themselves to film adaptations that don't have to cut so much as potentially expand in certain cases. But I've argued for quite a while that I actually think that most film is a short medium, not a long medium. Whenever you see a novel adapted for film, they have to cut. It's very rare that a novel ends up entirely on the screen when there's a film adaptation of it. It is just the reality of making a film version of a book. But a film version of a short story, you can keep a lot more of the content and have room to potentially expand it. And that's why I say, I think there is a strong connection between shorter forms of prose fiction and cinema. So those are my thoughts. If you guys have any, I'd love to hear them. Anything that sort of comes to you. I'm just taking a look here to see if I have everything from my notes. I've covered everything that I wanted to. I'm used to a rhythm of discussion. That's the thing. And when I just lecture straight up, I'll often run out of content about 30 minutes in. So it's 20 minutes of class is all you guys. Not always, but today it certainly is. But if you have any questions or observations about the film, fire away. Instances that you may know of short stories being adapted into films. Trollbridge, that we looked at earlier this semester, has been adapted as a short film. You have to pay their Kickstarter to see it. I've not seen it yet. I want to see it. I just haven't supported the Kickstarter yet. But that one's been made into a film as well. And there was a film version of Dolan's Cadillac. And there have been a few. One of you actually wrote about a adaptation of Poe's Cask of Amontillado that was made into a film where they fleshed out the characters. And it changed the way the story felt. Was it originally a short story, Sandra? So Sandra just said The Postman you mentioned in class is a short story by David Brin. I've got the novel back here, but I wasn't aware that it was a short story first. Oh, so there was a short story of it. I like that part of the book the best. I like the beginning of it. Now I'm interested to know like how much of this. That's what's fascinating about reading a short story, and then if it gets turned into a novel, reading that novelization and seeing where does it fit inside the novel. Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, there you go. Parts of this book appeared earlier in slightly different form. Part 1 as The Postman in the November 1982 issue of Isaac Asimov's SF magazine, and Part 2 as Cyclops in the March 84 issue of Isaac Asimov's SF magazine. Cool. Want to talk about lacking fidelity? Part 1 of The Postman, the film totally tracks with it, and it throws out part 2 entirely. That's all right, because the film might have other intentions. It may be looking to do something different with what the work suggested. The Thing, based on a novella. Not quite a short story, but close. They just keep popping into my head. Stand By Me, Stephen King's The Body. But I don't know if that's a novella or if it's a short story. I don't know. Do you think we should have done a novella? Here's a question for you. I mean, this course is called the short story, but we don't have a course where you'd stick a novella. Does it belong in this course? I've been wondering about that. That, by the way, is also the discussion question for the week, is me asking what worked in the course, what didn't, what were your favorite stories, what do you absolutely think I should keep, what should I lose, what should I keep, that kind of thing. Maybe I should do my rundown of short stories that are worth taking a look at today, and then you don't have any obligation to show up next week. Yeah, an interesting comparative study to look at the novella alongside a short story. Might even be, it'd be cool to find a novella that was developed from a short story. Its length, Kit. Its length, and that's about it. I mean, but it's this interstitial point. It's a very strange designation. I don't know why we still have it around, except that people win awards for them all the time in science fiction awards. Best novella, right, as a category. By the way, that's about all I've been reading lately. I mean, I'm reading a monster book right now, but when I say monster book, it's really thick. It's not a book about monsters. But before we were all sent home and whatnot, I was for my just what I would listen to for a book while I was doing my commute. I started looking down the award winners for the Nebula and Hugo Awards for Best Novella, and I started listening to those because I wanted something short. I didn't want to have that great big expansion of milieu and characters and the dragging out of the narrative. I wanted a nice light snack, and that's what novellas often feel like. Sandra says, I'd be curious which novellas would be picked. I'd only choose one, because with the course being called the short story, I wouldn't want to spend more time with it than that. I know a lot of short stories that I love, but I can't think of that many novellas. Yeah, that's the thing, right, is that they're getting published all the time, and I think they're a ton of fun. Some of my favorite books are novellas, really. They're not the full-size novel. So the one that I just read is called All Systems Red, and it's the first book in a series called the Murderbot stories, and it's about a cyborg who hates humans but has to protect them as their security detail, and it's fun because it's in his head the whole time. But there were a lot of things about the style that reminded me of short stories, because you don't have enough room to develop things too far. So you have to keep your cast kind of tight, to keep the focus of the narrative has to be far more precise than you get in a novel. Novel can jump around into multiple perspectives, but with a novella, you still want to largely stick with one perspective. And then there's another novella that I absolutely adore. I'm going to forget the guy's name, James Morrow. And the novel's called Shambling Towards Hiroshima. And it's an homage to the classic monsters of Universal films when they were doing like Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman. But it's also an homage to Godzilla. And then it's this bizarre alt history where instead of developing an atomic bomb, America develops a Godzilla monster to attack Japan during the Pacific War. And it's an entertaining book because James Morrow's just a hell of a writer, but it's also a bit of a anti-nuclear weapons parable. It's a very, very clever book, but it's a novella. It's short. I read it on the plane from San Francisco to Edmonton. So a novella, in my experience, a novella takes about 4 hours to read. So it's not quite that single sitting most of the time, but it's pretty darn close. It's right on this cusp. And I think it would be interesting to have that, but there's only so much room in the course. So what do you do? The last time that I taught this course, we looked at full-length feature films that were based on short stories. We looked at the short story and then we'd look at the film. But I wasn't sure about doing that again this time around because there's a huge leap, right? And it becomes almost starts, you're watching a really lengthy movie after reading a short story. So we looked at Company of Wolves and Field of Dreams. Those were the ones that we looked at. I just thought this one's so it's almost like 1-to-1 in terms of length. I wish we had more short films, actually. Well, we do. People make short films all the time. I wish that they had a greater market. I think we talked about this at one point in the semester because we were talking about how Love, Sex, and Robots? Am I saying that right? On Netflix. Is this anthology series or film, however we want to say it, but it's a bunch of short films. So I think streaming services are creating a situation where short form cinema has a market now. So I think that's going to grow in the years to come. I think it's going to change things. I mean, you even go to Disney Plus and you can watch all these short, these Pixar shorts, or Mickey Mouse shorts, and they're like 2 minutes long, and they're incredibly satisfying as little bits of film to watch before your feature attraction, or maybe just while you're eating lunch. But I think or you've even got anthology series, I suppose, like Black Mirror, Love, Death, and Robots. I was just thinking it was called Love, Sex, and Robots because I was watching it with my son, and there was an episode that I don't think he was ready for. Yeah, Julie. Yeah, I agree. Black Mirror is totally a short film anthology. It's like the old Twilight Zone or Outer Limits TV series. And those were written, a number of the episodes for the Twilight Zone were written by people who were writing short fiction as well. So there's this neat crossover, but there's not a lot of successful anthology series when you look through the history of TV. Most television tends to be episodic long character arc or episodic long plot arc, closer to a novel in many respects. And that's where I think if you want fidelity to a novel, TV series, miniseries or TV series, like it's got to be 4 to 8 or 10 episodes, right? And that's potentially per book. I think that's the right correlation to have if your goal is fidelity or you don't want to end up cutting too much. So TV is increasingly, this is interesting. I just thought of this. It's occurred to me that TV is increasingly the space where both the novel and the short story have a better chance of being adapted through streaming services. Because again, it's changing the way that we're viewing these narratives. Especially when you think about binge watching. Binge watching, people get pretty upset about binge watching, but binge watching is not. Binge watching is the cinematic equivalent of staying up all night to read the whole book. That's what I think. I don't binge watch, but this is because I'm old and I'm too tired. All right. That was a terrible conclusion. I'm old and I'm too tired and I can't watch the shows. Like I said, I'm going to come back next Wednesday for one last, just sort of almost like a hangout. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite short story anthologies, maybe even some of my favorite short stories as recommendations for you, because, you might need something to read in the weeks to come. but also as an opportunity for you to, if you want, and this is only for my students, any questions you have about the course, we can totally free for all. Anything that has occurred to you, and that can have to do with literature in a broader way. So I will entertain rabbit trails like I don't normally, which is to say I normally will go down a rabbit trail and then realize I'm doing it and say, okay, let's get back to this. Whereas this, I'll be like, we're on a rabbit trail, woo, and I'll just keep going. All right. So that's what I'm going to do next Wednesday. You don't have to come, but if you're like Wednesday rolls around and you're just staring into the abyss, come on by and join me for some discussion about short fiction. One last discussion of short fiction. All right. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'm going to stick around for just a little bit if there are any questions relating to the paper or to the course. You're welcome, Sandra. It's been a pleasure having you as a student. It's been fun. I'm glad you thought they were dope fiction choices, because it's always a bit harrowing to make choices for people to have to read anything that one is forced to read. I have, by the way, as an sort of incidental, I think I've finally cracked how to not have too many people in a class. I just teach horror. That's all I need to do. Because normally my classes will fill right up. And this year, as I'm watching the registration for that horror film course next year, it rose pretty quickly to 25, and then it just stopped. And it's not going any further. So I think, just people know they're going to be forced to watch horror films. And if that's not your jam, you don't want to be in there. So this has been interesting. We've got some dope horror choices there as well, but not everybody's into that. So it's always it's always a little nerve-wracking to choose works for people to study. Because I want them to enjoy them. I want us to have a good time. I don't think education needs to be painful. Not that it always is. I'm not saying other people are making it painful. I'm just saying I had some experiences when I had some experiences. Yeah, it's gonna be a cool class, Bree, but you're gonna be free. Free. You're gonna be beyond. You're out of here. Where are you going, Courtney, that you are not staying at McEwen? Are you off to the U of A after this? Or is this your grad year? Are you on the way out the door? Kit, I have largely, going over the U of A. Is that for a teaching degree? Yeah, I've finalized the horror list. I mean, I've got this one section that I'm a little fuzzy on because I can't decide if I just want to like throw the 90s out entirely because it was a bad decade for horror. But then Scream came out in the 90s, and it's indicative of the whole this subgenre of horror where you have comedy horror. So I'm like, but I'd rather do Shaun of the Dead for that, or even Zombieland, because then I get zombies and comedy all in one. Because I've already got slashers. That's why I don't want to do. That's why I don't want to do Screams, because I've got Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho. So I feel like I've covered the humans are terrible, humans as monsters. Cool. What age group are you planning to teach, Courtney? I don't know why I'm doing this like this, but this is the only way I can do this. I'm already in. We should just go do a Zoom session. Kit, I'm doing. I'm gonna do Nosferatu or Cabinet of Dr. Caligari for a silent film. Then I'm doing Bride of Frankenstein. So there's one per decade is the plan. Bride of Frankenstein is the 1930s. Cat People is the 1940s. It's a wacky, weird film, but it's indicative of the genre, and you need to see it to really understand it. 1950s is the Terror of Dracula or the Horror of Dracula. I can't remember, but it's the Hammer horror version of Dracula, because Hammer brings all of the Gothic horror back in the 1950s, and they get a whole last gasp, and Hammer becomes this really viable studio for a while as a result. 1960s, Psycho. 1970s gets 2 because, oh my gosh, if there ever was a decade for horror, it was the 1970s. I had so much trouble choosing as it was. And I might throw out one of them, but I'm not sure. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Exorcist for the 1970s. For the 1980s, it's going to be The Thing. For the 1990s, like I said, I almost feel like not doing anything, just as a way of saying like the 1990s weren't a great decade for horror. When Tim Burton made Sleepy Hollow at the end of 1990s, people were like, "Ooh, what are you doing, Tim? Horror's not popular right now." So, okay, I've got a few votes there for Shaun of the Dead. Yeah, Brie, Nosferatu's the best, right? Elementary, what age are you hoping for, Courtney? Like grades 1 through 3, 4 through 6? I nearly became a 4 through 6 elementary teacher, and then I realized I didn't want to teach other people's kids. I just wanted to have my own. And then I teach other people's kids who were adults. So where were we? 1990s, then 2000s. And this is where I have the opportunity to do Shaun of the Dead. I was also thinking about Cabin in the Woods, because I feel like that would be a heck of a bookend for the whole series. But I don't know. Again, I love it. I love Cabin in the Woods. But I also really love Shaun of the Dead. And then I'm doing 2 at the end, because I don't care, because it's my class. And I'm thinking Get Out and It Follows. I know, Kit, this is the problem. This is the problem with this course, is like I was really torn about whether or not just to make it modern horror. So the course could start in the 1950s with Psycho, and then I'd have more room for some of the ones that we think of as really, really great horror. But I think there's something really valuable about learning the history of a genre. When I teach genres, I almost always, obviously we didn't do it as much with the short story course, but when I teach genres like science fiction or fantasy or horror, I want to teach the survey of it to some degree. So I want to go back to the beginning of the horror film and go, okay, what are we seeing here? And watch those transformations over time, because I think it's also interesting to study how what terrified people in the 1930s and 40s is not scary to us at all. Like we talked about this a little bit in regards to Edgar Allan Poe's Cask of Amontillado. Because if you remember, Zach said, I didn't find this story scary. And I'm like, nobody finds Poe scary anymore. Unless you really dig in and sort of imagine what's going on. It's not a terrifying story. It's creepy, it's unsettling, but it's not scary. And it's the same thing with audiences were genuinely scared by Frankenstein and Dracula and Wolfman in the 1930s. Even the Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and the Wolfman. There were scenes that were considered genuine horror in that time. And so I think it's valuable to take a look at those things. Yeah. I don't do that with my intro to film course. My intro to film course, I'm solely focused on teaching film language. And the textbook that I use mostly uses modern films, not classic films. So I don't use an awful lot of old movies. In fact, I used none when I did it last year. Bad me. But I think you could. I could put film titles on a bulletin board and just throw darts to choose, and you'd still be able to teach film using that. Because to teach film language and how we read film doesn't require that we watch the greatest films. I also think that, though, about short stories and novels. I think you could teach these things without always using just the greats. Should you have the greats? Yeah, you always want to say, like, this is what the brass ring looks like. But I think it's good to occasionally watch a film that is perfect. All right. Well, have a good week, everyone. I will see you in a few days. I guess it's not a full week until Wednesday, but on Wednesday I'll be back. And like I say, we'll just let it be a free for all. So what we just saw just now is pretty much what I'll let it be for the duration of class on Wednesday. So take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.